Derrick Henry joining the Dallas Cowboys would be one of the most seismic shifts in the NFL landscape in recent memory, a move that would immediately elevate the Cowboys from playoff contenders to legitimate Super Bowl threats. Picture it, the most physically dominant running back of the last decade, a player feared by defenses for his punishing runs and late-game takeovers, now donning the iconic star on his helmet, pounding the turf at AT&T Stadium behind one of the NFL's most recognized offensive lines. The very idea is enough to spark excitement across Cowboys Nation and dread in opposing defensive meeting rooms. And yet, despite all the fan buzz and what ifs, there remains a gap between the dream and reality. But let's indulge this possibility fully. Imagine how Derrick Henry, with his rare size, speed, and durability, could reshape the very identity of the Cowboys offense, forcing the league to reckon with a team that for years has flirted with greatness but lacked that final piece to make a serious championship run. Henry, standing at 6'3" and weighing nearly 250 pounds, has defied modern NFL trends. In an era where many teams use running back committees or lean heavily on the pass, Henry has shouldered immense workloads year after year and still produced elite numbers. With over 9,000 career rushing yards and multiple 2,000-yard seasons, he has established himself as a generational talent. Imagine that level of productivity wearing silver and blue. The Cowboys, a team whose offense has frequently sputtered in key games, would finally have a player who can dictate the pace, control the clock, and demoralize defenses deep into the fourth quarter. His presence alone would open up the passing game by drawing safeties closer to the box, which in turn would benefit Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, and any other receiving threat on the roster. The offensive strategy could become multi-dimensional again. No more reliance on predictable screen passes or short yardage slants. With Henry in the backfield, Dallas could establish a smash-mouth identity, something that's been sorely lacking since the departure of Ezekiel Elliott in his prime. And speaking of Ezekiel Elliott, the re-signing of Zeke in 2025 has raised eyebrows. While a nice nostalgia piece for fans, it's clear that Elliott is no longer the dominant force he once was. His burst has diminished, and he struggles to turn the corner with the same authority. Rico Dowdle, another back on the roster, has shown flashes, but lacks the consistency or durability to be a lead back. And meanwhile, the Cowboys front office has made minimal efforts to draft or develop a true feature running back since Pollard's exit. That's where Henry's potential acquisition becomes not only exciting, but necessary. He could be the missing puzzle piece in an offense that too often leans on Dak Prescott to perform miracles through the air. Instead of throwing 40 times a game, imagine Dak turning around and handing the ball off to Henry 20 to 25 times, grinding down defenses and setting up manageable third downs. It's football at its most fundamental, but also its most effective. From a locker room perspective, adding a player like Henry could transform the team's mentality. He's not just a stat machine, he's a tone setter. His work ethic, quiet leadership, and ferocious competitive drive would inject much needed maturity and focus into a team that often gets derailed by distractions or inconsistent performances. Young players would learn from his preparation and discipline. Veteran players would feel a renewed sense of urgency knowing they have a real shot at postseason success. The Cowboys have often had the talent, but not the edge. Henry brings that edge. He's a no-nonsense player who does his job, doesn't crave headlines, and elevates those around him simply by how he plays the game. In big moments, he shows up. In cold weather playoff games or high-stakes December matchups, Henry could be the guy who gets 120 yards on 28 carries while the rest of the league's backs crumble under pressure. Of course, there are hurdles. The first and most obvious is financial. Jerry Jones has publicly claimed the Cowboys couldn't afford Henry, citing salary cap constraints. And while it's true that Dallas has big contracts looming, Ike's including long-term extensions for Micah Parsons, CeeDee Lamb, and potentially a restructured deal for Dak. We've seen NFL teams manipulate the cap countless times to land marquee players. Void years, performance incentives, front-loaded guarantees, the playbook exists. The question isn't whether they could make room for Henry, it's whether they want to. The Cowboys have a history of chasing stars, but they've also been hesitant to invest in older running backs after the Zeke contract backfired. Henry, now in his 30s, would need to be willing to accept a team-friendly structure, possibly a short-term deal with performance-based bonuses. If the front office gets creative, this deal could happen without destroying their future flexibility. Another point of concern is age and durability. Henry has racked up a massive number of carries in his career, and while he's largely avoided serious injury, running backs often fall off a cliff once they hit 30. But Henry is not a normal back. His body type and conditioning regimen have allowed him to maintain a high level of performance well beyond what's typical for the position. If anything, splitting carries in Dallas, perhaps 15 to 20 touches per game rather than 25 to 30, could extend his career even further. With the right usage, Henry could deliver elite production over the next 2 seasons without being run into the ground. That's especially true if Dallas complements him with a third down back or someone who can take over in obvious passing situations. A balanced rotation could keep Henry fresh for late season pushes and playoff runs when his bruising style becomes most effective. Then there's the fit with Mike McCarthy's offensive system. Some have argued that Henry's downhill inside zone style doesn't mesh with McCarthy's passing schemes and preference for quicker tempo and spacing. But offensive schemes are not static. They adapt to personnel. If you have a Derrick Henry on your roster, you adapt your playbook. The offensive coordinator would be foolish not to build packages around Henry's strengths. Power runs, play action passes off his movement, misdirection plays that force defenders to key on him. The possibilities are endless. Having a weapon like Henry gives the Cowboys optionality they haven't had since the early days of Zeke. It gives them balance, and if McCarthy refuses to adapt, perhaps it says more about his inflexibility than Henry's fit. The chemistry between Henry and Prescott could also be crucial. Dak has never had a true running mate in the backfield since Zeke's decline. In fact, much of the pressure in recent years has fallen solely on Dak to be perfect, and we've seen the cost: turnovers, injuries, mental fatigue, and an over-reliance on tight window throws. With Henry, the pressure eases. Defenses that once blitzed Prescott relentlessly might now hesitate, fearful of giving Henry even a half second of daylight. The Cowboys' playbook could open up again with motion, bootlegs, delayed screens, and even RPOS becoming legitimate tools. In the red zone, where Dallas has notoriously struggled, Henry becomes an automatic threat, capable of pushing the pile or leaping over it entirely. Imagine the situational flexibility. 3rd and short? Give it to Henry. 1st and 10 on your own 10? Give it to Henry. 2nd and goal from the 3-yard line? You already know the answer. But perhaps the most overlooked aspect of this potential move is a psychological impact on the NFC. Imagine the headlines. Derrick Henry joins the Cowboys. It would instantly shift narratives. Teams like the Eagles, 49ers, and Lions, all of whom pride themselves on physicality, would have to reconfigure their defenses. Rival coaches would have sleepless nights. NFC East matchups would become wars in the trenches. Henry versus the Eagles front 7. Must-watch television. Henry on Thanksgiving Day in a primetime slot, the ratings would explode. And for the Cowboys, a franchise that always lives under the microscope, this could finally be the rare acquisition that lives up to the hype. Even if the deal doesn't happen now, and to be clear, Henry is currently with the Ravens, the possibility remains for the near future. perhaps Baltimore decides to move on in 2026, or maybe Henry negotiates a release or trade if things don't work out in Maryland. Maybe the Cowboys realize midseason that their current backs aren't enough, and they make a blockbuster trade at the deadline. In this league, things move fast. Today's rumor becomes tomorrow's reality, and if even one conversation sparks between Henry's camp and the Cowboys front office, the fuse is lit. Cowboys fans should remain hopeful but grounded. The dream of seeing Derrick Henry in a Cowboys uniform is alive, but it's not inevitable. It will take willpower, compromise, vision, and timing. But if the stars align, if Jerry Jones picks up the phone, if Henry is open to a fair deal, and if the system is willing to adapt, then perhaps, just perhaps, we'll see one of the most dangerous backfields in NFL history come to life in Dallas. And when it does, watch out, because the league will never be the same again.